Right. Very good morning or very good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for joining us on this webinar. This is the second in a series. My name is Crispian Olver. I'm a senior advisor at WRI, and I'm also a non-executive deputy chair of South Africa's Presidential Climate Commission. I'm sorry you can't see me, but I'm having a technical problem with my video, which I'm going to try and sort out once our first speakers are speaking. So we're following on from the last event, which happened on the 10th of June. It was just after the World Bank IMF spring meetings, and it was before the Financing for Development conference. In that meeting, we looked at how country platforms can be used to drive green growth in developing countries. And we had some really fascinating examples presented. Today, we are looking a little bit more in depth at the supply side. So how do countries put together the different components of the capital stack? And what are the roles of the different financial actors in doing that? And it's a very important area to focus on. I mean, the big issue that we have to grapple with is one of alignment and coordination and lowering transaction costs and getting leverage in the capital stack. So I'm going to ask three speakers just to make some brief opening remarks. And given that the Africa Climate Summit is around the corner, so it's happening the week after next in Addis Ababa, I want to ask Sam Magumi, who's the co-chair of the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action. Sam, if you could just make a few remarks and also share your expectations for the Africa Climate Summit.
Thank you so much, Crispian and team. It's an honor and pleasure really to be here this afternoon to speak about country platforms. You've been told, Sam Magumi, my name. I'm the deputy co-chair for the Coalition of Finance Ministers on Climate Action. The co-chair is the minister, so a deputy is the minister himself. But again, I work with Minister of Finance Planning and Economic Development in the Macroeconomic Policy Department of Uganda. It is really great to talk about country platforms. One, because we see, and as you know, all of you, is that we're interested in getting to see that investments that we have in terms of climate action are long-term and are impactful and meet the macroeconomic objectives of different countries, on top of increasing adaptation, resilience, and mitigation. So these are things that we're looking at. And we want to run away from short-term, disjointed projects that probably have outputs, but don't result in tangible, impactful outcomes. And this is why this is really very, very important that these series are on for us to understand how can we get these vehicles, these platforms in place and making them work, which is very, very critical. So I'm really honored that these discussions are going on because they're very important. And there is something we should know. There's talking about country platforms, but having country platforms operational and getting the results. So this is where we should go. And the question for today, how can we make these country platforms? How can we align them? How can we operationalize them? How can we make them long-term and be able to be sustainable is very, very critical and important. And I want to thank the organizers for this series, for that we're here to debate this. And it's going to be helpful for those countries because there are many of them, including Uganda. We're thinking of country platforms, but we've heard of them before. So what is happening? We'll discuss that in detail. Thank you so much, the organizers, Crispian, and the whole entire team. There's a great lineup of panelists who are here, and I know the discussion is going to be strong. But going now forward is that when we go to African Climate Summit 2 that is coming, we shall have more discussions there. There's an event on country platforms that we're organizing. We are intending to bring ministers on the 10th day, that is 10th of September. We shall have a minister dialogue, high level, discussing a number of things, including financing, including the vehicles, and including the country platforms themselves. We're also working with the Ethiopian government to see how we can escalate this one into a high level presidential panel. But that aside, we've had a number of series in terms, some of you have been involved in this, in terms of thematic group meetings, technical meetings, where we are designing some output that we expect is going to come out of the Addis Ababa declaration, speaking about financing, and country platforms will be strongly reflected in what we submit. So our discussions are critical and important at this time. And I want to thank you for logging in. I want to thank the panelists. I want to thank you, Crispian. And let's continue with this. And the Coalition of Finance Ministers on Climate Action is totally backing this with the support of the Ugandan government, who in our seat as co-chairs at the moment. I want to stop here for now, Crispian, and back to you. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Sam. I'm just getting a bit of feedback. Anyway, thank you for those remarks, Sam. They're extremely helpful. Sorry, are you getting feedback on the platform?
Just a bit. If you turn the speakers off on your on one of the devices, just make sure audio is coming through. We're not.
We can't hear you, Crispian.
You can't hear me.
Now we can.
Now we can hear you.
All right, very good. So, colleagues, moving from the Africa Climate Summit to COP30 in Belém at the end of the year, we've seen amazing leadership from, the Brazilian government. They put country platforms firmly on the agenda at the G20. And you saw them launching their own domestic platform with a number of innovations. And, the action agenda that's emerging around COP30 is incredibly forward-looking and encouraging. And, Ivan Oliveira, who's the Deputy Secretary for Sustainable Development Finance in the Ministry of Finance, has been, integrally involved, particularly in pulling the circle of finance ministers together and bringing finance and environment and planning ministers into conversation about this. So, Ivan, it would be really useful to just hear some reflections from you about how we align climate development and finance objectives, particularly in this Baku to Belém roadmap. And what you see as the role and place of country platforms as one of the pillars. So over to you, Ivan.
Thanks, Crispian. Great to be with you. In fact, many friends and partners in crime of pushing country platforms all over the world. Let me just briefly bring to you 2 points as we start this event. First off, it's great to see how we could really maybe create a movement, and Brazil is also part of it, especially from our G20 presidency on country platforms. Obviously, the issue was there, but I think we've been able to reframe the agenda of country platforms, reinforcing country ownership, flexibility, and connectivity as key pillars to build up country platforms, as it is well stated in our G20 Task Force on Climate outcome report. But more than that, I think, also in our G20, we could engage with Finance in Common initiative. It's great to see Remy here. Also there, we could really reinforce some issues that later on this year, for example, during the South African presidency, we do see flourishing, like the role of national development banks in the process, and so I think something that needs to be in the minds of those that are with us here today is that there's a process going on, and that process really connects all key stakeholders and all key fora to push for, reviewing the role of country platforms as an effective and efficient instrument to help finance projects in our economies, in developing economies. So that has to do with the G20, that has to do with our COP30 presidency, and other initiatives like the Finance in Common, where essentially we're really reinforcing the understanding of the instrument, the needs of the countries, and in what the kind of planning they need to have in order to push forward. And also, I'd say, and that's very critical, a push that we could bring to key stakeholders, including MDBs, but especially the climate funds, and the GCF is playing a key role here in fine-tuning their strategies in connection to countries, in helping them to finance their NDCs in a way that the instrument of country platforms is ending up becoming more and more effective, and more countries are interested in that. So for Brazil, it's really a pleasure to be part of that endeavor, a joint and international endeavor, where we're not only pushing together, but we're really pushing for action in what is critical. Since that this event is really focused on financial actors and their role on country platforms, let me just reinforce something from our perspective in Brazil, the way we have walked the talk here in building up our country platforms as we were, updating the concept in our G20. I think there are two key institutions that I'd like to highlight here that, as you see, they are well represented here in this meeting too. First is the way the GCF understood what Brazil was doing, and they really jumped in since the beginning as a key partner in the building up of our country platform. So we're using our readiness program to finance the secretariat, and we're essentially using the platform to build up our country program with the GCF in the years to come. So essentially, not only they're helping us in the building up of this instrument itself, but the instrument is helping us to frame what we're going to do with the GCF in the years to come, how the concessional money that should come to Brazil is going to be prioritized. And another key stakeholder that has to do with the role of national development banks is BNDES. So our National Development Bank has been with us since the beginning, and have BNDES in the platform is absolutely critical to go, as fast as we are going here in Brazil. We launched the platform. We built the platform from April to October last year. In less than 1 year now, the kind of mature that we start to see in the platform, in understanding the challenges for the sectors and subsectors that are there, in fine-tuning those needs to what the different ministries that are in the interministerial committee can do, is really well connected to the role of BNDES in the secretariat. So without BNDES there, we couldn't go as fast as we were going. And there are some news on the platform. Maybe I'll come to those later on. That are also part of this process of strong engagement and stronger engagement more and more from BNDES with the secretariat of the platform, what shows the value of really using the platform as this special locus for connectivity, as well framed in one of the principles that we have there out of the G20 paper. So great to see how MDBs are also connecting, especially those that in our case are connected to private sector financing, IFC, for example, IDB Invest, and also exploring possibilities when it comes to guarantees around the platform. I hope I can come back to some of those details later on, but let me just reinforce the role of the GCF and the BNDES in our case. And again, Crispian, colleagues, thank you very much for your partnership in this process. I think what we are delivering here is a lot bigger than the adding up of the parts. Is really restructuring and helping countries to find the proper instruments to finance the transition. So count on us. And we move forward to Belém with that. So the Circle of Finance Ministers really has one of the 5 pillars of the circle is around country platforms, and we're pushing with a solution that is connected to the presidency approach on how could we streamline some of the solutions and present in Belém at COP. Some of them, there's a whole agenda on country platforms that definitely we hope to see you all there with us, and we can also come back to it later on. Thank you very much. A pleasure to be with you.
No, thank you, Ivan, and thank you for your leadership on this matter. I mean, I think it's been incredibly important, the way that Brazil has been providing not just global leadership, but also demonstrating in practice how this can work in your country directly. So you can, I think, count on everyone here to join you in Belém and make this thing a success. So I'm going to move us on to Remy. And for those of you that don't know Remy, I mean, he's a global leader. He's the chief executive of Agence Française de Développement. They have been standing behind country climate and development programs for many, many years. Remy, I want to ask you if you could just reflect on FFD4. I mean, it was a very important point where we came together. In particular, what do you think the outcomes of FFD4 were and their implications for the country platform agenda? And to the topic of this webinar, did FFD give us better clarity on the role that we want different actors to play, and get the leverage and coordination that we're looking for? So over to you.
That's a big question. Thank you. Thank you, Crispian, and hello to everybody, and good to be with fellow panelists, friends in the room. Thanks to WRI for the invitation. I will talk, of course, on behalf of AFD France, but also on behalf of the Finance in Common movement Ivan just mentioned, and maybe even more on a personal note, for the sake of this open discussion we have with many of you for a long time, but of course with a bit of an urgency now and a bit of a mandate coming from TV and FFD4. Let me maybe start with a word on a step back, maybe a word on the context that led to this short history of country platforms. Well, we had a decade, 10 years since COP21 to sound the alarm about climate, and governments setting more ambitious objectives to reconcile development and climate. So the sound was loud, and so we troubled, we scared many people in our constituencies. We see the reaction now, but that was what we intended. I mean, we expected, and of course now, maybe since last January, we are into a new phase where we absolutely need to operationalize what this message and surpass maybe existing obstacles in the way we do our financial business, in the way we operate. And it's particularly urgent since the previous paradigm, let's say, of international cooperation, we called ODA for the last 50 years, is rapidly weakening, maybe vanishing from view. You know the figures. And it's a challenge for climate as well, because climate finance was built from ODA. And so my intuition, my guess, my work is our work, collective work, because this discussion is ongoing in many circles, is to build as rapidly as possible a new paradigm, a new framework, reconciling, as I said, climate and development, job creation and mitigation, providing a stronger national say, and mixing public and private finance like never. It was not the purpose of ODA. I mean, ODA by definition, there's no private finance within. There's no private finance captured in the ODA framework. Will never be. And of course, also provide a framework that would help bring policy coherence behind the global goals. So that's the work that is ongoing. And my point is, I really believe that the country platform discussion, not exclusively, but the country platform is a key component in helping the emergence, the structuration of this new framework. We are discussing actually for a few years country platforms. It started, if I'm right, within the G20. But first, let's say, as a globally led initiative. And so, of course, it did not really start for a few years. And we needed COVID, probably, an existential threat. And then in 2021, the year after the Just Energy Transition initiative set by the G7, discussed in Sharm el-Sheikh, to have this idea of a country platform start existing. Something changed. 2020, 2021, in parallel with a surge of sovereignty concerns worldwide, affirmation, responsibility. And this is something we got very clearly last February when WRI, Melanie, I think is here, Crispian hosting. We had this seminar at the same time as the first G20 finance ministers and central bank governors meeting, and in the sidelines of the Finance in Common Summit, to take stock, share experiences about leading countries moving forward in defining what a country platform means. Of course, Brazil was in the room, Ivan. Colombia also moved forward. South Africa, of course, through the JETP momentum. Indonesia, I can mention Rwanda as well, very interesting. Morocco. Well, I don't want to be unfair to, but we felt that there was something new and something strong early this year, maybe as a response to what was happening in our world and the need to bring something new. A semester afterwards, where are we? Where are the places, the fora where we could continue this work? Seville was helpful. Seville, Crispian was there. I think the country platform were part of the discussion about financing for development. There's a specific initiative that was put on the Sevilla platform for action, the SPA, the Spanish government with the UNDESA proposed. Nicolas Picciotino is with me, and maybe he will intervene during the webinar. So I want to thank AIIB and UNDP taking the initiative of this what we call the Global Financial Playbook, which is gathering the tools and the best practices about country platforms to assist countries willing to start their own. That's for Seville and the government. We are also working within Finance in Common about it. There's a dialogue between the public development banks, BNDES and others. And I want to mention also a specific initiative we are working on, which is called the Global Guarantee Platform. I don't want to be technical, but I want to thank MIGA and the World Bank Group willing to articulate how MDBs and national development banks could join forces and demultiply, synchronize their balance sheet behind the right and the political objectives. Hopefully, Team Europe, the European Commission, others will join to have a at-scale instrument of guarantee that would make country platforms really operational. And so these are work in parallel. And of course, Sam said it. The coalition of finance ministers for climate is extremely important. And to conclude, just to say that we are beginning to see and maybe to disintricate what a country platform could mean. So in my view, but again, it's a personal view, there's of course a political component. So Crispian, you talked about the Presidential Climate Commission in South Africa. President Ramaphosa leading with colleagues, Deepak also, I see Deepak, setting the tone and the political guidance. And then there's the operational layer. And this operational layer, I agree with Ivan. I'm sure you need a national institution at the heart of it. And in countries where, and there are many of them, you have a public national development bank like DBSA, like BNDES, like PTSMI in Indonesia, like BRD in Rwanda, like Caisse des dépôts et consignations in France. We need a country platform in France as well. It's a global initiative, G20 initiative.
We'll come help you, Remy.
Of course. No, I'm pushing for that, believe me. It's a bit complex these days. But my point is we have to distinguish the political level guiding and the operational level, and this operational level needs a national component, of course, with international partners motivated and of precious help for the country. So in Brazil, it's the GCF. Fine with it. In South Africa, I think it can be the World Bank, it can be the African Development Bank, can be AFD, if you like, can be KfW, can be your partner of preference. Again, not exclusively, to form a coalition of the willing with a significant firepower to make the initiative happening. And it can start with health, it can start with climate, it can start with biodiversity, but in the end, it's about a place where the country is discussing about, like we crave for that for so long, of its national priorities with international partners in a truly equal and partnership way that would be structured into the country platform. The functions of the country platforms, there are many of them. So again, the political dialogue, highest possible level of political dialogue. Financing operations, preparing operations, of course. And I want to add one dimension which I think is very important is the measurement of the financial flows and the measurement of impact. If we want to be convincing, we need a place in the country where the success of the policies decided together would be measured and shared with the public. And it could be also the place where we could confront or reconcile international flows. I mean, maybe something coming from, again, I pay my respect to the ODA framework, but I mean, the international components with the way it combines with the national financial system. And you see, so both the political and the financial dimension that could be measured, and really, is it working?
So, Demi, we're going to have to move on. I'm afraid we are going to run out of time for the panel.
Sorry, Christian, one last sentence is just to say how COP30 and Belém is important, and how could we factor in the country platform mechanics within NCQG. And here, you know, the NCQG and the Sharm el-Sheikh dialogue, there are 3 layers in the climate finance discussion: the 300 billion, the 1.3 billion of Paris-aligned finance, and the Sharm el-Sheikh dialogue. My dream, my hope is that the country platform could help the 1.3 trillion
exactly.
be satisfied, more than the Sharm el-Sheikh dialogue only, but I know it's not completely consensual, so I just put that in the discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the goal is to build this up, country by country, to ultimately get to our 1.3 target. So thank you for that, Remy. And I mean, particularly sketching the new development paradigm that we are talking about. And I loved your mention of the Global Financing Playbook, which for anyone that's sitting and thinking how to put these capital stacks together, it's an incredibly useful tool and set of guidelines. And if Nicola is on the call, I wonder if he could just post a link to the playbook in the chat, because that would be very useful for people that are following. So we're going to move on, and we have a number of very interesting panelists, and just to sort of get us into the mood for the discussion, I want to ask the WRI Global Director for Climate Economics and Finance, Melanie Robinson, to come in. So Melanie did a really interesting paper earlier this year, and she was zooming in on how these different financial players come together and how you stack finance and what the core challenges are. So can you just, Melanie, set us up for this discussion by posing what you think are the most critical questions?
Yeah, thanks, Crispian, and thanks to everyone who's spoken so far. I'm looking forward to the panel. So I think I just want to flag 5 challenges and 4 questions that came from the conversations that we had with many countries about the challenges they were facing in the financial system and how the country platforms can help. In terms of challenges with the climate development financing, you've already heard some of these from the previous speakers. Firstly, a lack of alignment behind government priorities. Secondly, fragmentation with these small scale projects, which Sam mentioned, may have outputs, but not necessarily the impact that we want. Third, lack of coordination among the actors, whether that's among MDBs, DFIs, vertical climate funds, or even across public, private, domestic, international. Fourth, the high transaction costs that come with dealing with so many different players, all of them with different systems, processes, requirements, and sometimes mismatched timing. And fifth, as a result of this very low leverage, it's been a frustration to many that the low levels of private finance mobilization, including domestic finance. And to the extent that we've been trying blended and de-risking instruments, they've been very much project by project, sometimes questionable additionality, dare I say, and not always with replicable structures that allow us to go to scale. So those are the kinds of challenges that kept emerging from conversations. And I think that raises some questions that country platforms can help to address, which I'm looking forward to hearing about from our panelists. Firstly, how do we bring all the sources of finance together so they're coordinated behind country-led transition plans and so they can really take their relevant place in the capital stack, aligning their risk appetite with the risk in that stack? Second, within that, how do we make best use of scarce concessional finance? It's always been scarce, but it's even more scarce now. Whether that's coming from MDBs, vertical climate funds, bilaterals, philanthropists, or domestic finance and national development banks, how do we really use that to unlock private finance at scale? And this includes the use of blended finance and de-risk instruments, getting their design right, getting the replicability, getting that scale that we just heard about with the design that Remy and Miga are working on. Third, how do financial institutions harmonize their systems and processes more, even align with national systems and processes to reduce the transaction costs? This is actually politically and technically incredibly difficult, but unless we can crack that, it's going to make it very complex for countries to work with multiple financial actors. And then finally, how does finance get its act together in terms of the upstream support? So can we coordinate technical assistance and capacity building far more for the coordination of country platforms, for that hard work on the alignment of policy and regulatory and institutional frameworks that reduce the risk and improve the returns on investment, really helping to unlock that private finance, to develop pipelines, and to support the social transition. So, Crispian, many challenges in our current system, but I think although country platforms aren't the only answer, if they can really help bring finance together into that capital stack and dealing with some of the upstream issues in a more coordinated way, we will make serious progress towards that vision that Remy gave us of a different financial system, helping countries to transition at scale. Thank you.
Very challenging questions, Melanie, and thank you for phrasing them so crisply. So, I mean, I'm hoping that's now going to set up this dialogue that we're going to have, and our panelists should feel free to contribute on any of those issues. And I want to start with you, Dana, if I may. So, Dana Barsky is the Global Head of Sustainability Strategy and Net Zero at Standard Chartered. You guys have been actively weighing in there. I mean, the initiative that you've been backing, this Lesotho country platform, stole the show at FFD4. I mean, it was launched on the last day, and there was a huge amount of interest in it. And you know what I was interested in your work in Lesotho is, you know, what can we learn in terms of the potential to scale private investment in less developed contexts and, you know, very fiscally constrained countries like Lesotho? If you could come in on that.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I will talk about Lesotho in a moment, but I do want to just touch on a few things. I think when Remy was setting the stage, you know, I couldn't help but think about the challenges that we've had over the JETPs over the years and how much time has lapsed. And so I think the first thing that we just need to acknowledge is that a lot of lessons have come out of the JETP, and I think that's helpful right now. And that, you know, speed is of the essence, and I don't think we can afford to wait another 5, 6, 7 years to see these successes. And I think, though, we can speed it up, and that we do understand. I think Ivan touched on this, that it's really important to bring the key stakeholders in early. And I think this is some of what we're doing in Lesotho as well, that I think is going to accelerate this process, which is, you know, bring in, you know, all of the government, private sector, everyone, you know, involved in, from technical assistance through the capital structure, bring them in early and understand what everybody's needs really are and what the art of the possible really is. And then just one other comment about FFD4. I think it's really relevant to this conversation, which is, never before have I been to an event where I think the level of trust and the level of understanding amongst the different types of partners, be it private sector, public sector, the DFIs, the MDBs, the government officials. I think right now we actually have a much better understanding of what we each can bring to the table, what we can't bring to the table, what we need. And we've now been in enough forums that I think someone mentioned earlier, we're almost becoming friends, dare I say. But I think that's really important. I think that changes the equation, because having that level of trust and having that really frank dialogue is making things faster, and is helping us get to the point where we need to be. So then, specific to Lesotho, what I love about Lesotho is, one, it's, you know, a private sector led country platform, which really hasn't been done before. And I think that's important because we can, you know, bring that private sector drive, bring that private sector discipline, you know, to the program. I'm not saying it's the only way to do it, but you having that private sector almost that private sector lens and that private sector independence really works to bring in the different players, as long as there's a level of trust, right, with the government and with the ministers. And that's, you know, again, that's just super important here. Now, Lesotho, what I love about it is it's a country that, frankly, it's small enough that you can really map it out fairly easily in terms of what's priority, what their needs are. And could just make tremendous change, because you can take a country that is an energy importer, and frankly, where they have, you know, young population going to seek jobs elsewhere, to change themselves to a clean energy export. I mean, and create jobs. The amount of change that could happen for this country is just tremendous. And also, what I like about this country platform is that we do have the full support of the kingdom, of the government, and everyone is really aligned on this tremendous change and how we can use Lesotho as a role model for success to expand into countries where, frankly, it might be more challenging, either from you know, diversity of the size of the country and the type of country, like Brazil, and or even more financially constrained. Now, I think to your original question, Crispian, as to, you know, how do we work in a financially constrained country? I think back to some of the points that Melanie made, which is, one is we have to be really efficient with that very scarce concessionary capital. And we really need to find that delicate balance between what does the country need, what are the important political priorities, versus what's financeable, right? What's bankable from a private sector perspective, and then trust each other to bring in that concessionary layer in the way that does bring in, as Melanie said, brings in the most catalytic capital, mobilizes the most capital, and really helps helps the country platform with those wins, right? What are those visible wins that are going to really make the most difference for a country? So I don't know, I could talk about it for a very long time, so I'll handle it over to some of my other panelists, but happy to talk about any of those specific points. But I think my big takeaway is I'm very optimistic that we can seize on COP30 and this moment where we can take all the lessons of the past JETPs and bring all the parties, many of them on this call today, together, be it from early stage technical assistance readiness, which is so critical, all the way through the capital structure, including all the way up to the guarantees and that concessionary capital. That's very important.
So, I mean, can I just follow up with a quick question? In your opinion, are all of the financial actors properly aligned? I mean, are you getting that level of cooperation and coordination in making this platform happen?
Yes, I'd say we are more aligned than we ever been. I mean, there's been a lot of initiatives that we've taken part of. For instance, the World Bank Private Sector Lab Initiative has been really helpful in trying to understand what the art of the possible is for the World Bank and what the private sector needs. So I do think we are getting that. Now that being said, there are of course, challenges, and there's of course a little bit of you need certain things to happen in a certain order. And so we're not, I would say, fully there yet because there are certain constraints, but I have to say I'm really pleasantly, I think I'm very happy with where we stand right now. So looking forward to advancing this more at COP and, ensuring that our pipeline is matched by where we need different partners to be and their timetables. And again, I guess my request here, or my call to action here, I think, is to say we really, all the players, to the extent they can accelerate the time frame on which they work, will really make a difference here, because time is unfortunately often the enemy.
Yeah. Thank you for that, and thank you for your frank answers. So I'm going to turn to Deepak. South Africa's a neighboring country. As Remy said, we've had a few years of doing the JETP, so there's a little bit of track record there. And Remy mentioned this work that they're doing on this blended finance credit guarantee vehicle. There was a very important seminar in Paris done with MEGA and AFD and various other players. So Deepak, I mean, I know South Africa is looking very seriously at that, particularly as a way of unlocking private investment into the national electricity grid. I'm interested, I mean, sort of two questions to you, and they are slightly naughty. Is this JETP 2.0 that we're looking at? And do you think the original JETP put enough emphasis on how we bring the private investment component into the platform?
Thank you, Crispin. And thankfully, I'm not reliant on career progression by virtue of being either diplomatic or a likable personality. So let's start with the semantics, history, as well as narrative behind the JETP. And I've been pretty consistent, even as a member of the presidential climate finance task team, which did the sort of broad strokes of the negotiation. The JETP is neither an investment plan nor the genesis of a country platform. And I want to be pedantic on this issue, because I see the JETP as having arisen in a particular historical context at a particular time, and which, if one had to analyze it very, very carefully, was simply a coming together of similarly oriented and like-minded countries that realized we needed to move something forward because the multilateral system was not delivering the kind of global response in a practical, scaled, and scoped way that was possible. So the JETP is really just a partnership declaration between South Africa and a group of international donor countries, as well as the climate investment funds. What is of material importance, though, is what we call the JET-IP. And the JET-P was, in fact, the motive force that led us to develop a sense on the mitigation side, and this is also something that needs to be stressed. What would South Africa be prepared to commit to that brought about the dual imperative of climate responsiveness on the other hand, on the one hand, but our own industrial and economic development agenda on the other hand? And so in that respect, yes, the JET-P was very catalytic in getting South Africa on one side of its climate response mitigation to begin to answer a set of questions around how you reconcile development and climate response. And as we unfolded over a period of time how one would meet our carbon or decarbonization objectives, it became clear that it is not through policy alone, it is not through strategy alone, it is in fact through a coherent and very comprehensive understanding of which are the sectors that are going to take us on that decarbonization journey, while providing, in South Africa's case, us with economic growth, export and industrial competitiveness, as well as jobs. And that then leads me to say that the JET investment plan, now implementation plan, had a couple of retrofits as well, as we learned through this experience. There's institutional issues which needed to be addressed. There's also the issue of infrastructure versus what can be financed by the private sector alone. There's the issue of which sectors. And so later on, we brought into focus the freight and logistics sector, because we know beyond the electricity sector, freight and logistics will be the next decarbonization industry, so to speak. And then, of course, just transition. Finally, when it comes to infrastructure, we came to the conclusion that the private sector is ready, willing, and has proven itself capable of rolling out without too much of further de-risking, nor too much of public finance support on the renewable projects, given South Africa's experience in the independent renewable power producer program over a number of years. However, the binding constraint, given the orientation of our grid and where the generation capacity exists, which is fossil fuel heavy, and where the demand load centers exist, we needed to fundamentally reorient and strengthen the grid. And however, the grid needed to be resolved for. And it is in this context that we started the conversation with MIGA about how to find a way of de-risking as well as blending a series of capital stacks in the overall capital and investment needs of the grid. We can go into some of the details, but essentially the credit guarantee vehicle is not JET-P 2.0, but is in fact there to unlock a critical binding constraint that will in turn unlock the kind of coming into existence of generation projects, which we believe the private sector can very easily conceptualize, develop, and finance and implement. However, they need to evacuate those electrons onto a grid that is not suitable for that evacuation right now. You're muted, Crispian.
Sorry, that's extremely useful, and thank you for the clarification. And I think for a lot of people that's an interesting distinction. You know, the JET-P deal, which was done with these development partners, and our own homegrown investment plan, and the various vehicles that are being brought into operation there. I wanted to ask you about Lesotho, but given the time constraint, I may come back to you if we've still got time on that. But you know, I know the Lesotho platform depends critically on its linkages into the South African grid. So if you could maybe just think a little bit about that, and I'll see how time goes. So, Catherine, can I turn to you? So, Catherine Kaufman is the Africa Regional Director at the Green Climate Fund. And I mean, as all of you know, GCF has been incredibly supportive of this broader global country platform agenda, including making available the $7 million per country in readiness funds for countries to implement a whole range of their national climate and development plans. So I wanted you to just reflect a little bit on your experience and whether, I mean, you're coming in and making these strategic investments in countries which are absolutely catalytic. Is your experience that supply side actors are sufficiently coordinated, both in terms of how we, translate plans into financeable programs, and how we move from investment plans into actual project finance deals? Basically, can we coordinate better in that space?
It's almost a rhetorical question. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Crispin. I think not enough. There's not enough coordination. But I think we have examples, and I want to be as controversial as Deepak to say that even the concept of country platforms started way before it was internationalized as this is what country platforms are, because it really depends on the context of a country, what type of investment platform they set up. And it's not necessarily an energy platform, as we know now. It could be any sector, right? But it depends. Great examples, of course, is what we saw earlier with Ivan, Brazil. Great championship from government in driving this with the development finance institution. And obviously the availability of players such as GCF to provide that readiness funding to set up a secretariat to help with coordination is critical, because coordination allows for alignment, and healthy alignment is healthy alignment between public and private sector, meaning that we ensure that our capital is used efficiently, irrespective of where it comes from. The players, we don't overlap, but we have complementary offerings in terms of capital. We ensure that risk is allocated and mitigated appropriately, that private sector and public sector retain their intended goals, economic returns, whether it's jobs or increased tax revenue or spending on for public sector, or impact returns and profits for private sector. And lastly, that we ensure that these investment plans are nationally driven, or let me say bottom-up driven. And I think that's, in South Africa, we did it almost the other way around with JETP. started from top down, and then we really took ownership, which resulted in what Deepak said about the JET IP, the investment plan that we came up with, which is bottom-up driven. So can there be better coordination? Absolutely. And in terms of an example of that is probably the well-recognized renewable energy program, and that and the IPPO, that was extremely well coordinated. We engaged private sector on a large scale. The structure that I believe that Standard Charter is facilitating with Lesotho, again, a replicable structure that can be replicated in many countries. So from a coordination perspective, it's easier to bring that to private sector. It's easier to bring that to other capital. I think what we need to see more of is platforms that have the potential to provide strong governance mechanisms, investable and bankable pipelines, and sufficient financing capital. And that's domestic, international, private, and public sector. But coordination is very much about ensuring that there is agency from both public and private sector. Can we improve that? Absolutely. And I'm suggesting that country platforms are a powerful tool, not only to drive climate goals, but also to strengthen coordination for the reasons that I mentioned. And the readiness funding that you're talking about, that 7 million is part of a new envelope of readiness of about 500 million for countries. There's still a lot of readiness funding that has not been used by countries.
From the last cycle.
Yes, from the last cycle. So there's an opportunity to do even more. And how you coordinate that is also as a catalytic effect. So
Yeah.
we've got great examples, but in short, I don't think enough is done yet to bring about that coordination.
Yeah. And I mean, I had a second part to the question I wanted to pose to you, which was whether we're getting enough leverage out of these very scarce concessional finance.
You see, because from a GCF perspective, my answer will probably be yes, because of how we approach how we look at these investment requests or these asks. And probably a little bit of a backstory is important. GCF's key responsibility is to support developing countries to meet their goals under the Paris Agreement, the NDC long-term strategy and NAP goals under the Paris Agreement. And in Baku, we just developed, it was decided that 300 billion of climate finance would go towards developing countries, scaling up to 1.3 trillion. GCF, centered to our investment strategy, is to provide concessional finance to align with the goal that NCQG has put in front of us to meet. So is it leveraged properly? It can be leveraged properly if we all understand what it should be used for, to establish investment frameworks that remove uncertainty, policy, regulatory uncertainty, and even create certainty around financial returns for private sector. It can provide concessional funding insofar as it allows us to prepare projects that are enablers, open the market, unlock new markets. That's the way we can leverage it. And also, because we can provide co-financing alongside other funders, whether it's equity, whether it's grants, guarantees, it allows us to be catalytic in nature in the way we use our concessional funding. And I know that there's a big emphasis of GCF funding being used for project finance. But remember, when you're looking at a country platform, you can design whatever your country needs. So it can be a green bond. It can be in adaptation space. It can be in the forest. It can be a debt for climate finance product. Whatever in the context of that country will allow it to meet its climate goals. And so from that perspective, I think as a leveraging instrument, GCF funding can certainly be utilized to unlock further concessional funding and be catalytic in nature.
Yeah, that's great, Catherine. Thank you for that.
Dana did want to say something.
No, I was just going to say, Catherine, just to your earlier point on coordination, it's just interesting when I hear you speak. I think about Glasgow and how I wouldn't have even known who GCF was at the time. And then, fast forward to Baku and the relationship that you guys have developed with the private sector is, was so much further advanced. And as we go into Brazil, it's even more advanced. And I think I think that coordination is just, leap years ahead of where it was in years past. And that I think someone asked me a question about what makes me hopeful here and optimistic. And I think that's real change. And I think that will accelerate things in a positive way.
Yeah. No, very good. So I want to just turn to some of the questions in the chat. Before I do that, we were going to be joined by Zef Kafungi, but I don't see him on the platform. So if he is here, can someone just alert me to that? But if not, I want to turn to the questions that have been posed in the Q&A. So there's, thank you. I see a number of them have been answered. So thank you to the panelists that have been religiously typing replies. But just to touch on some of the themes that are coming up. I mean, the one is how civil society and NGOs can be part of platforms. Do they have a role? This one, which I think has been partly answered, which is what role can the NCQG, so this high-level global target, what role can it play in helping developing countries with country platforms? And it would be good to get some reflections. I know Ivan basically touched on this earlier, but any of you are welcome to come in on this. Isabel Garcia Drigo asks about food system transition mechanisms. And can country platforms be focused on food and food security, which I think is a really topical question. The Homa Bay Youth and Agribusiness community-based organization introduces themselves, interested in adaptation. So, I mean, again, linked also to the earlier question around food security and also youth involvement. So are there ways that, we're talking about very technocratic processes. Is there a way for young people and youth organizations to be involved in this? Patrick talks about
these, or should we respond to some of these now, or?
Yeah, I'll come round. Let me just finish picking up some of the questions, and I'm going to ask each of you to pick up on issues that you think are relevant. So there's one about SDG implementation, also again, youth and youth involvement. What is the role of underdeveloped and developing countries in this process? So, I mean, that's critically important. Are we serious about country ownership and country leadership? So I think that's a really interesting topic to delve into. Someone also asks about the potential for digital data platforms to support particularly transparency aspects around financing arrangements, tracking debt, blended finance facilities. So is the way of doing that. Diego Ayazo from Chile wants to know, talks about the reality of the global South and what would it take for private investors to pressure governments into creating strong participatory plans for recovering land and communities damaged by their growth speculation. So, that's, again, an interesting question. There's a practical question about how much readiness countries are drawing from the fund. I mean, Catherine, you could maybe stick a link into the Q&A on that, because a lot of that is on the GCF website. Cynthia Wang asks how we measure the success of platforms. So metrics for success. And then there's, I'm going to pause at this point because I've already given you a long list. But Luis Fierro asks about given the debt burden and the very narrow fiscal space, what role is there for debt for climate and debt for nature swaps? I mean, we've been talking about this for a long time. How real are these? Do they have the potential to move the needle? So let me pause it at that. I know I haven't covered every question, I'm afraid, but there's a long list, and I do want to give the panelists a chance to respond to some of that. So over to you. I don't know who'd like to go first. Donna?
That was some list, but I'll give it I'll take a few of those points. Maybe I'll start with food systems, because I've put some thought into this, and I'm personally passionate about transforming food. Conceptually, you could have a country program aligned on food security or food. The reality is it's actually much harder than energy transition because you're not building specific plants. You would need to say what's right for the country. Where's our, for instance, our water sources? You know, should we not be growing tomatoes in a place where you need a lot of water? And what that would mean then is large scale, potentially large scale transition of where food is being grown and what types of crops. Is very, very challenging, politically, from geographically, and it may extend outside a specific country. And so I think where it comes to food security, I think looking at the issues of a country holistically and as a lessons learned from country platforms is a great approach. But I think the answer that you're going to get is actually more challenging than energy transition. So that's on food. Whoever was happy to talk about that more, if someone wants to contact me. Let me just take, I think, the NGO engagement and I think the last comment on debt swaps. I'd say yes, obviously it depends on what type of NGO, but look, we welcome engagement. I think there are a lot of roles for NGOs that they could play in terms of country platforms. Anything from the secretariat to just more help on the ground and executing on some of these projects, and or for instance environmental reviews. There's so much there's so many places to help. I think there is a lot of room for NGOs to plug into country platforms. I'd say to the comment on debt swaps, NGOs have been critical on debt swaps, and I am a huge fan of debt swaps. I think they alleviate debt burdens of countries at the same time as releasing funds for sustainability priorities for that country, and I think they're a very elegant solution. NGOs such as TNC historically have played key roles in terms of managing those trusts that are focused on oceans or reforestation. And so I do think NGOs are a really important part of this. I would also say, just to add, philanthropy, the philanthropists, I think, really have been starting to think about participating in country platforms in different ways and guarantees as well. And we really welcome their involvement because I think it's just another piece of the equation where the philanthropic capital can really mobilize private sector capital in ways that haven't been done historically. So I'll pause there and see if others want to jump in.
Thank you, Donna.
If I can
Catherine?
follow up. Yes. So from the food systems perspective, you can definitely look at a country platform when you come to GCF specifically. We have quite a portfolio in terms of food system and ecosystem projects and agri projects or smart agri projects. Obviously, there has to be a climate rationale, and it's actually not that difficult to prove that because the climate change really impacts food security. So we've built up quite a portfolio. What we do see is obviously that nexus and that integration, which is happening all across the infrastructure space between food, water, and energy. And if you can bring a project that has like cross-cutting impact, where you touch on a different number of sectors, even better from a funding perspective. And that, from a development perspective, can start with project preparation facilities to help develop something that's investable, then also look at obviously distribution networks following smart agri projects to ensure that it's sustainable, because sustainability is a big part of our question around concessional finance now. The project has become independent, so we can step out of it, and it's sustainable. So private sector in the projects are, as a player, a key participant for execution is extremely important. But yes, there's definitely scope there. And Debt for Climate, I think the only product I I could be wrong, but the GCF looked at there or funded was Barbados, I think. I think it's Barbados, but we're definitely looking, especially for the Africa region, we are looking at developing a product that we can replicate across the region, specifically a debt for climate instrument, because we understand that the problem with fiscal space, cost of borrowing, cost of capital for these countries, which means that they spend even less money on reaching important climate goals and climate investments. So I hope that is helpful.
No, that's extremely useful. Thank you, Catherine. Over to you, Deepak.
Thank you. And I'll try to be very brief. I'd like to touch on civil society. And to Dana's point, I do differentiate between civil society and NGOs. And I think it's important to differentiate between those two. From the South African context, or in the South African context, as we know, we've got the Presidential Climate Commission. And the fundamental reason for existence of the Presidential Climate Commission is, in fact, to harness all of the social partners, whether they be technical and academic on the one hand, whether they be interest groups, meaning business and labor, or whether they be communities who represent either communities that are going to be negatively impacted as we undertake this transition, or communities who have the opportunity to, in fact, become recipients of some of the distributive benefits of the transition. And we take civil society and engaging with them. Of course, it's not easy, because you have to go to civil society and be the lightning rod when you're there to listen to every single one of their problems. And you have to be really patient, you have to be nurturing, and you have to take them along with you on this journey. Without that, I can tell you, our own assessment of whether we can undertake our climate transition or not, the answer is no. If we go to a place like Mpumalanga, where we know what the impacts are going to be as the coal-fired power stations shut down and as the coal value chain goes into decline, we've already had the one example that has taught us many, many lessons. And therefore, the role of civil society in the conversation, they have an adage that says nothing about us without us. And we have to take that seriously, not just as a cliche. The other thing I wanted to talk about was someone raising the issue of debt burden in the context of fiscal constraints. I think that's a hugely important issue for developing countries. In the context of fiscal constraint, it is so, so important that whatever limited, and we know it's very, very limited, grant resources, deeply concessional, and then concessional resources are made available. In South Africa's case, a large part of the JETP funds have in fact flowed through the mechanism of conditional or policy loans into the National Treasury. And it is so important to understand that this cannot just disappear into a dark crevice that goes into the general budgeting process with no climate or just transition impact. And therefore, it becomes hugely important to ensure that whatever grant, concessional, and limited fiscal resources are available, these are utilized to either de-risk or to ensure that they form the early part of a first loss or an equity portion of a capital stack that actually multiplies. And not only multiplies for effect, but also multiplies in a sustainable way so that those resources can be seen to be achieving the outcomes as well as the outputs that they are intending to.
Thanks for that, Deepak. So I missed a couple of points in the Q&A, and I want to just read something that Sandra Martinson has posted, where and this is a word of caution, I guess, to us sort of pushing all of the burden, the development burden, onto private finance. So she says, not everything what is needed and should be bankable projects. This is why we have public sector and public finance to deliver public goods, including climate action. And as long as the idea of country platforms is about using international ODA more efficiently and better aligned with national needs and priorities, this funding should be concessional and not driven by profits. I can only say here. But Melanie, I'm wondering if you don't want to pick that up in making some closing remarks. I'm going to turn to our other speakers who've we're sort of heading, I'm afraid, towards the end of the time that we'd allotted for the session. So I want to bring Sam, Melanie, Ivan, and Remy back in. And feel free to respond to any of the issues our panelists have raised, also any of the questions in the chat. And just while you're doing that, I see one of our Dose Sosuga from Togo has said, who can you put me in touch with to help integrate the country platform into my country? I wonder, Hayden, if you could just reply to that with your email address, and Dose, we will link you up with the right people. I mean, you've got on this call, and as part, there's a broader network of support organizations all working on this. We can link you up with the right people. So I'm over to Melanie. I sort of suggest, can you start on that issue of concessional finance and where we use it?
Yeah, thanks, Crispian. And yeah, I mean, many of the panelists have made this point that it is so scarce now, always has been, and it's even more scarce. So we have to use it incredibly carefully. I like the way that Deepak talked about it, that obviously, you know, we have to make sure that where we use it, we're not just using it to fund a project, which otherwise, you know, could have had other types of financing, that it's really used there to unlock other finance, whether it's a first loss or it's being used through other kinds of instruments. And if I think about, you know, a bilateral donor, if they're thinking about how to use each dollar, yes, they can use that dollar where grant finance is absolutely needed. That might be capacity building and technical assistance. They can pass that finance to an MDB or vertical climate fund, where they can multiply it 3 or 4 times and provide it as highly concessional finance. They can use it through their own, putting capital into their own development finance institutes, again, bringing the instruments that can really multiply the finance. So I think every donor, if you like, has a responsibility to think really hard about how to let each dollar go as far as possible. And then when we put the finance into the capital stack, doing so as well. Underline again, though, technical assistance, capacity building, and much of the work with making sure that the social transition is managed. Those things do need more concessional finance, and there's not much you can do to stretch the finance and make it go further. You just need to make sure it's really coordinated and really well targeted to be strategically used.
Thanks, Mel. Short and sweet. Can I turn to you, Remy?
Sure. I think I already exhausted my time initially, so
You did.
I'll be very short.
But a few minutes.
I totally agree with Deepak, distinguishing JETP and the country platform. And I think there were many remarks about could country platforms deal with food systems? SMITA could it deal with water? Could it deal with agriculture? In my view, we have to be kind of sector agnostic. I mean, it has to start from a priority for the country, and can stay to deliver and experience what's innovative and helpful for this sector, or can deploy into a fully fledged country platform. Probably all of us could have in mind. So it's just JETP somehow, but you're closer, of course, than I am, was igniting the discussion in South Africa and other countries. And of course, now that we know what's happening for JET, we have to reach another step. Of course, like Sandra wrote it, we have to clearly distinguish public and concessional finance and pure private investment carefully. and also the blended zone between the two. The point is, if we want to have more concessional finance and recharge the narrative and probably the country platforms at scale, innovative, could be convincing, because we know what's happening if we only think about concessional finance per se in the world of ODA, as I tried to say it initially. So I see there's a journey through private to come back to public, let's say. And this is what we are trying. And my last point is about civil society and debt swaps. Just to remind everybody, there are experiences about specific governance. We did it with Ivory Coast, others in the previous phase when there was debt relief. We call that C2D, Contrat de Désendettement Développement, and there was a governance associating local civil society. And probably we have to take stock of that to make the best possible use of these new debt swaps that we see happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Remy. Very important insights. Ivan, if I could turn to you for your closing reflections.
Thanks, Crispian, and thanks for the panelists for the great panel. Let me just touch base on two specific points, leverage and results. I think it was a very important part of the discussions. First, so what would be a successful country platform at the end of the day? So, and maybe bringing here our perspectives from Brazil. Obviously, in order to answer that question, that means what we should go first. What is the role of the country platform at the end of the day? And in Brazil, we have, let's say, a very specific role here. So, and then I'll get to the results and the leverage too. But the point is, our country platform is not for all sectors and not for all subsectors in the sectors that we have selected. So we have energy, we have industry, mobility, nature-based solutions and bioeconomy there. But we have subsectors that are there in the platform. And just to give you one quick example, so onshore wind power is out of the platform, offshore wind power is in the platform. And we got to those sectors and subsectors after assessing the plans, the larger in structuring plans like the ecological transformation plan that the Minister of Finance leads, but also the energy transition, the new industry one, some subsectoral plans of the Minister of Environment, the climate plan, and so on. So the platform has a role to play in Brazil in some subsectors that are strategic to Brazil, and where we understand there is a clear interest from the private sector, but given the challenges, especially in some of the challenges are really technological challenges too, that the projects bring, we need a special place like the platform to help them to come to fruition. So private sector investments connected to national public plans, and in subsectors where there's a real need for blended finance mechanisms, connecting to the concessional money out of the GCF, to the concessional money out of the climate investment funds, the push from BNDES. So this is something very specific to those pools of projects that are really connected to those subsectors. And when it comes to leverage, for example, something that very important that we're starting to do in our platform is really to go beyond projects. And we had a very interesting interministerial committee meeting this month. So we're starting to think about bringing private equity funds to the platform. So the platform could also, be catalytic in getting private equity and also helping to finance the projects that are in need of equity in the platform. In that sense, for example, it is out in our website, our country program with the GCF this week. we are building up an equity fund together with BNDES using GCF money. So essentially 25% or around that of our country program with the GCF will be to create the equity fund that should leverage at least 1 to 8 in GCF money there together with BNDES. So then we start to see that there's a role for leveraging that the catalytic money and especially the concessional money that we have access to, and use the platform as this special place for the challenging projects. It's not for the projects that are financed in the market. If we're not creating a platform just to pull projects and say, great, we did this and it's there. No, it's really for what is challenging. So that's why for the 16 projects that we have now in the platform, more than 23 billion in total, all of them are challenging. Not even one is easy to do that. And we have huge projects, 3.5 billion in energy and 95 million in nature-based solutions. So quite different needs too. So leverage is critical, and we're really using the platform to do that, including through equity solutions. So the results, and I finish here, the results for Brazil is definitely, they would be definitely connected to getting the projects out of the platform. So our key push now with the Secretariat, with BNDES is great. We have 16, we're broadening, we're fine-tuning our platform, but we need to get the deals. So the results would be, if within 1, 2, 3 years, we'd have tens of projects that should be out of the platform in those challenging subsectors, well connected to Brazilian national plans, that would be a huge success. So that would be the purpose of the platform, to be a special locus to finance challenging projects, would be well accomplished, and we could celebrate. So a lot of work up to that, but that's again in our specific case in Brazil, given the way we've seen the value of the platform to finance key and strategic projects in Brazil. Obviously, that can change depending on the sectors and the country's priorities.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, but you make a fundamental point, Ivan, which is that platforms are one part of the toolbox. They're not appropriate in every sector or in every country context. So, I mean, the one thing I think we're at pains to emphasize is we're not pushing platforms just for the sake of it and saying that everyone should do a platform. It's not always going to work in every context. It's one of the things you can look at and use in order to scale behind long-term programmatic interventions. So thank you for bringing that point out. Sam, last but not least, I want to give to you to make some closing remarks.
Oh, thank you so much, Crispian, and that's good. And I'll just close with one word, but interesting conversation and very, very good and understanding. I want to make 3 points. One is sitting on the side of the Minister of Finance. I look at country platforms for each country being unique, depending on the question that they want to answer. So that should be fundamental. There's no one script that is going to fit all other countries. So each country should be able to work on its own format, but being advised by all of us to fit within their social, economic, and political agenda. That's something I thought I would bring out. The second point, which comes really close to Ivan's, because when you talk about counter platforms, they're this wide, you're putting different sectors together, you bring funders together, you bring different projects together. There was a question on monitoring and evaluation to see the impact. This is very, very critical. And for me, that is where, when you're planning to come out with a platform, you should have emphasis, which partner is bringing what, which sector is bringing which output, and how is it contributing to the overall impact and overall goal of the platform and for the country. Then you need to have a very good log and monitoring framework that accompanies you, and you should be able to explain. This should be very critical for the continuation of the platforms. From the Minister of Finance, I wanted to talk about the climate finance and the and the debt swaps. Very good money. We want it. We want even low, interest, concession of financing. We want. But the beauty with country platforms, and for us, really, that's why we want to emphasize, is it's not just money. Money, this is money, definitely you'll pay for it. But how do you use it? How effectively are you using it? How are you removing duplication of actions? And probably we need much less than what we want to bring in. So that for me, that's the country platform, and that's the more I think that we want country platforms to come with us. Crispian, like you said, you asked me to close. For me, those are my remarks, and probably to thank you. Waiting for another one. Is it next month or the other 2 months or next week? Please, I thank you so much for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Those are very forward-looking and inspiring words. And yeah, there's no one path with platforms. It's got to be absolutely appropriate to context. And what's exciting is seeing the way different developing countries are innovating and developing their own models. And one of the big things, that we need to be pushing going forward is to be building that exchange on a South-South basis between developing countries. So I'm not going to try to summarize the discussion. We're already a little bit over time. But maybe just to say one or two words. I mean, a couple of you mentioned that platforms are not entirely new. Countries have been doing them in the development space for many years. But I think we really are talking about a new paradigm in terms of climate and development, and bringing the climate and prosperity agendas together. And in many ways, this was kicked off by the Baku outcome, the NCQG, and this idea of two envelopes, this core of grant and concessional funding, but the 1.3 trillion per annum that we're trying to mobilize. And platforms is certainly one of the instruments that I think is going to contribute to us getting to that target. And you saw this new development paradigm being given full expression at FFD4. And, I know FFD4 didn't come up with any really big signature announcements in terms of new money, but what you saw was the new paradigm moving into place and much greater clarity being provided about the role of the different financial actors. And, Dana at the beginning spoke about the chemistry that she thought was in the room at FFD4. It was genuine. I mean, I think there is a real sense of knuckling down and trying now to work together, each with playing our different roles, and deliver on this agenda. And, we're going to pick up these themes very much at the Africa Climate Summit in 2 weeks' time. And you'll see there are a number of side events on country platforms, including a high-level ministerial event on the last day, on the 10th. So those of you that are there, I really want to encourage you to join us. But this whole agenda is being, skillfully pulled together by the Brazilian COP presidency. And you will see, I mean, in many ways, there are these inspiring presidency letters that they sent out, which, amongst others, I think the fourth letter or the fifth letter spoke about this action agenda at Belém and trying to trigger, moving from policy and planning, which we've been spending a lot of time doing, moving now into action, into implementation, and having the resources standing behind this action agenda. So, yeah, in many ways, I think this is an absolutely historic year. There's a lot we fret about. People have been worried that multilateralism is dead. But I'm seeing on this climate action space a new paradigm moving into place. And I look forward to working with all of you to give expression to it. So thank you very much to all of our speakers and panelists. I really appreciate, I mean, this was a quality set of inputs. Thank you to our audience. You've stayed with us throughout, and you've posed some really challenging questions in the Q&A. I think we will continue as WRI doing these webinars. I mean, we're basically doing them as a sort of public educational activity. And it would be very good, maybe in the build up to Belém to do another webinar, and we'll, if any of you want particular topics picked up, please email Hayden. I think Hayden put his email in the chat. So we'll respond to any requests for topics you'd like us to dig into. I mean, I noted a number of the questions around food and agriculture and water security, these adaptation sectors that are fundamental priorities. So we'll maybe pick that up in future sessions. Thank you all very much. I'm sorry for the technical issues on my side, but I managed to navigate it eventually. I mean, this has been run off my cell phone. So next time we'll have the camera working properly. Thank you all, and goodbye.
Thank you, Crispian. All went well. Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.